Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stephanie Ann Again. I am your host, Stephanie Brinkerhoff, and I am here to talk about all things deconstruction, spiritual crisis, psychedelics, Jungian psychology, and basically just my process of discovering who I am again and again after a lifetime in Mormonism. I tend to be a very uncurated person, so much of this podcast is stream of consciousness style. I aim to create a space of vulnerability and human-to-human connection by sharing personal stories and real-life experiences rather than just sharing information. So thank you so much for tuning in. Let's go ahead and jump in. All right, you guys, we need to talk about Jesus. It is time to talk about Jesus. As you all know, Jesus is kind of a hot topic right now, especially out here in the West. Kind of not the greatest things happening in the name of Jesus. And as someone who grew up Christian, who identified as a very, very Christian conservative person for the majority of my life, who now does not identify as Christian, I wanted to do an episode about the Christian psyche, because things are getting weird. And when I say Christian psyche, I mean like more the fundamentalist or very extreme or strict Christian religions. Obviously, there's a lot of people who identify as Christian who are not doing weird shit. So, as I mentioned, I grew up in Utah. I grew up in one of the most densely populated areas, or densely populated with Mormons in Utah as well. Obviously, the whole state is, but there are particular areas that are even more so than others. And, you know, people will say that Mormons are not Christian, like from the outside. I remember hearing that all the time when I grew up. But let me tell you, and the reason they say this is because, like, you know, Mormons believe that God and Jesus are separate. And it's like a theology thing, you know, people in Christianity get weird about it. They're like, you're not Christian if you believe that. But let me tell you, Mormons worship Jesus. Jesus is the whole point. And of course, there's a bunch of weird shit that gets added in with Joseph Smith and all the weird doctrines that come with Mormonism. But the center of Mormonism is Jesus. I grew up being taught about Jesus from before I could even talk. And, learning about him every Sunday. It was like you go to church for 3 hours on Sunday, and then you have your youth group activities during the week. You have your church camps during the summer. You even have church at school. Like one of your class periods is called seminary, and it's like, you know, going to church before you go to the rest of your classes. And all of that time, I was learning about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, of course, but I was learning a lot about Jesus. And I wanted to go into why Jesus, like the archetype of Jesus, is so powerful to the point where it can get people to be doing weird things or believing weird things or doing terrible things or committing acts of violence, supposedly, quote unquote, in the name of Jesus. And if you want to understand like how powerful Jesus is in the Christian psyche, the archetype of Jesus, there's a few things to understand. One is you have to understand the power of archetype and symbol in the psyche. Two, you have to understand the power of your unmet childhood needs when those are not addressed and how much they can control your life and the way you think and the way you view the world. And three, you have to understand the power of an unintegrated shadow. All of these things are at play when it comes to why Jesus has such a gripping hold on the minds of so many people. So first is understanding the power of archetype and symbol. In my last episode, or not my last one, the one before that, I talked a little bit about like the power of symbol and how humans need symbols in order to orient to reality and make sense of the chaos and whatever. It's like one of those things that seems like it might not be a big deal, but we actually need coherence in our symbols in order to not like slip into psychosis. So the power of symbolism is very, very strong in the psyche. And then in Jungian psychology, they talk a lot about the unconscious. And there's your personal unconscious, but then there's also the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious is kind of like the collective mind. It's like the theory is that like there's this basically like a catalog of or a library of like experience or patterns that have existed since the beginning of time that repeat over and over and over again across all different cultures. And it's like we're all connected to the collective unconscious, whether we realize it or not. That's why these patterns repeat. They're like instinctual patterns. They're patterns of the human psyche. Some examples of archetypes would be like the hero, or like the hero's journey is like one that we hear of, that myth we hear of all the time. And then you have like the great mother, or the wise old man, or the trickster, or all of these other archetypes. And then there's also deities who are simultaneously archetypes, right? Like Buddha, or Kali, or Shiva, or the devil, and of course, Jesus. So when you connect to an archetype, it's not just like a character in a story. It's not just like something that's happening in your mind. Because it's like an instinctual pattern in the psyche, when you connect to an archetype, it's a visceral experience. It's like a feeling of resonance. This is why people connect so much to their gods or their goddesses or whoever it is that they worship or pray to or have as a part of their spiritual practices, because it's a felt experience through your entire body. So if you look at Jesus as an archetype and you think about everything that Jesus symbolizes, it's like Jesus is compassion, he's love, he's grace, he's peace and charity and all of these like beautiful qualities. But he also symbolizes like the power of like resurrection, and he's somehow human, but also somehow God. And in Jungian psychology, Christ is essentially the symbol of the self, like the capital S self. It's like the archetype of wholeness and of union. So when you're connecting to the archetype of Christ, there is so much emotional and energetic charge behind that, because it's like a massive archetype. It's not like it's almost like Jesus, in my opinion. I feel like he almost embodies multiple archetypes. He's like a collection of archetypes. He represents so many things and can be connected to or felt in different ways depending on the person. So just the fact alone that people are using Jesus like this archetype, they're connecting to something that has such a strong charge behind it. Like there's such a strong resonance. And anyone who has had a connection with that archetype, who has had some type of connection with Jesus, you know what I'm talking about. Like it is very, very powerful. And that alone can be very, very sort of gripping in your mind if you are literalizing that. And if you don't know the purpose of symbol, and if you're being fed the wrong narratives or harmful narratives about like what Christianity is or what Jesus taught or whatever it might be. So that by itself can be very, very impactful for people. But then you add on top of that this relational piece, which brings me to my next point, the power of like our unmet childhood needs. When you're connecting with the archetype of Jesus, like he is also a human, right? That's part of what makes Jesus so easy to connect to and so powerful, is that it's like, oh, he's a human being. That means that he understands my suffering. He knows what I'm going through. But then he's also somehow a God. So he's never going to make any mistakes. He's never going to drop the ball on me. He's never going to lie to me. He's never going to betray me. He knows exactly what I need. He's an endless well of giving, 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 giving. So as a child growing up with that, and then even as an adult, it's essentially like an archetype that allows you to, it's like the perfect parent. It's like the caregiver you never had. Because everyone in life is always letting you down, and people are flawed, and nobody can do the things, blah, 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 how you want them to, or whatever it is that makes you feel betrayed by the world, or whatever it is that happens to you. Jesus is like the perfect person to be in relationship with, because there's an endless amount of trust there, because he can't make any mistakes. It's wonderful. It's like putting your trust in a perfect human being who somehow knows all of your thoughts and loves you endlessly and understands you perfectly and sees you in everything you wish you would get from your parents or your romantic partner or whoever it is that they just quite can't, or that they just can't quite give to you in the way that you want. Jesus can give it to you. Jesus can do that for you. And there is so much power in the relational piece of like building a relationship with this archetype that you're literalizing, that you think is an actual person. There is a lot of power in that. When I was a kid, I remember when I was probably 12, I got really, really sick. And it was just like a chest cold, but I had to stay home from school. And I was laying in bed and I was watching like Recess probably. And I remember this so vividly because it was like so traumatic for me. But I was in my mom's bed, and I remember my breathing started to get like worse and worse and worse very rapidly. And I feel like when you get a cold, you're kind of just like, oh yeah, like it's a chest cold, like it's annoying and like it might be kind of hard to breathe, but like I'm still going to be able to breathe, right? Like you don't actually think your airways are going to close. You like trust your body to fight off the cold. And as I was laying in bed, it was like that was like slowly, I should say very rapidly, going out the window for me. I was like, this feels like it's not normal. Like something is happening here. So I went out into the living room. I got my mom. She was vacuuming. And I was like, I feel like we need to go to the doctor. I feel like I can't breathe. And she was like, okay, like go sit outside for a minute. And it was the middle of winter. And I don't know, something that she had been told about the cold air was supposed to be good for my lungs, or I don't know. So I'm sitting outside in the cold and it's like getting really, really bad. And I was like, I can't. Like, Mom, we have to go now. So we get in the car. We're driving to the doctor. It's probably a 15-minute drive. And 5 minutes into the drive, I'm just like, like wheezing like that, like audible sounds. And I'm starting to panic. My mom's starting to panic. She's starting to cry. I'm crying. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse, where I'm just like, like gasping for air. And so then she starts praying out loud. This is a great Christian story. I would win so many Christian awards for this story. And she starts praying out loud. And I'm sobbing and I can't breathe. So I have snot all over my face. And she's trying to drive and she's crying and she's praying. And then maybe like 5 minutes before we reached the doctor's office, all of a sudden, my airways opened. This is a true story, guys. This is a Christian miracle. And I was like, oh. And I go, Mom, I can breathe. And she's like, praise the Lord, and she's like, and we're like, it's a miracle. It's a Christian miracle. And then they slowly started to get like, it became more and more, my breathing became more labored again, but it was like just enough air that it allowed me to like remain breathing, right? Like remain conscious before I got to the doctor. And then we got there and we went inside and they like took me back immediately and they put me on a nebulizer, and come to find out I had pneumonia and it had turned into some form of asthma or something. I think they called it something else. There was like a different term for it, but it was essentially asthma. And then, from there, I had to miss school for like 6 weeks. I had to do the nebulizer 3 times a day for like probably at least 3 weeks. I was really, really sick. And I remember after that happened, I was so traumatized that like even when I was healthy again, even when I, was no longer sick, when I would go to sleep at night, I couldn't like think about my breathing. I couldn't think about it at all because I would like start to hyperventilate and it would start to like induce a panic attack because I'd be like, can I breathe? Like, is my breathing weird? Is my breathing normal? Like, does my body remember how to breathe? And just my little 12-year-old me, like 12 is little. That's like, you're still a child. And I was so scared. And I would lay there in my bed and then I would remember, I'd be like, oh, but I have Jesus. I have Jesus. And then like my whole body would just relax. And I would feel no anxiety. I would calm down and I would be able to fall asleep. I did this for like a solid year. And then anytime after that, I would still get panicky about my breathing, and I would always be like, oh, but I have Jesus, you know? And of course, it made it easy at that point because I was like literally believing that Jesus was actually going to physically protect me. So it's really easy to put your trust in that, you know? But essentially, all I was doing was calming myself down through the symbol of Jesus. All I was doing was like connecting to an archetype that felt numinous, you know, connecting to something that felt divine and safe. And I was using that to calm myself down. And I remember after I left Mormonism, I was doing a lot of IFS, like a lot of parts work in therapy. And if anybody's familiar with this, it's like reparenting your inner child, essentially. So the idea is to like drop into your body, find the exiled child, the wounded inner child, and then the inner adult comes to the inner child and brings the inner child what it didn't get in childhood. The comfort, the witnessing, the reassurance, that whatever it is. And then the inner child recognizes the inner adult, and you know, you can learn inner resourcing. You can learn how to basically take responsibility for your own emotional states of being. And when I started doing that, anytime we would go to find the inner parent, me, the inner adult, my inner child would be like, the fuck is this girl? Who is this? Like, where's Jesus? We don't know how to feel safe or comforted or like we have peace or like love or anything without Jesus, because all of that had been externalized onto that archetype. And in some regards, like it's not bad to work with symbols and archetypes. Like I said, we need this. The problem with my experience and a lot of these like really fundamental Christian religions is that they're literalizing the symbol. And so then it was like I didn't know how to take that projection back. I didn't know how to be like, oh, what I was like accessing through the symbol, like the symbol can be helpful. The archetype is very powerful, but it's actually not literal, right? It's actually coming through me. It's just a symbol that's helping me access something that, like, I'm already whole. Like, I don't need Jesus for that. He's just helping me access that, like, through that symbol, right? So going back to, you know, kind of like summing up what I've said so far, it's like, you know, in the Christian psyche, you're connecting with this incredibly powerful archetype that holds a lot of energy. And then you're also developing a relationship with this being who is helping you access your own inner resourcing, that's helping you meet your unmet childhood needs. And so now you're in like this very personal relationship with like a deity. It's like, who's also a human. It's like, what could be better? Like when I was growing up, Jesus was like my best friend. I was like, you know, I'm lonely, but I got Jesus. Like, oh, I feel like the world is scary and like I'm confused and I'm lost, but I have Jesus. It was like Jesus was like my anchor, the thing that made me feel like everything was going to be okay. And then the last aspect to this that I want to speak of, you know, as if that's not enough, as if that's not enough that's already being poured into the symbol of Jesus, you throw on top of that the fact that Christians are really fucking scared. The whole theology of Christianity is terrifying. If they're literalizing and externalizing their light, meaning, you know, all the goodness comes from God, from Jesus, then all of the evil and the darkness comes from Satan. And once again, it's one thing to use the Satan archetype to explore shadow or whatever you want to do with that. It's another thing to quite literally believe that your soul is in existential danger. That's terrifying. That feels like living inside of like the Lord of the Rings. It's literally like your soul is up for grabs, depending on who has more influence, Jesus or Satan. And if you do the wrong thing, you could potentially experience an eternity of torment. And if anybody has experienced severe mental illness, and you know the prison, the darkness that you can feel in your own mind, whether that be from extreme anxiety or extreme depression or any sort of mental illness that you feel like a prisoner, you feel like you're in like torment in your own personal hell. The thought of experiencing that for eternity is so terrifying. I remember when I was a kid, when I was probably 7, I was about to be baptized, and I had a nightmare one night where there was like, it was one of those nightmares that was really visceral, and it felt like I was like half awake, half asleep, kind of. Like you can kind of like see your room, even though you're dreaming, you know? And it felt like there was a dark spirit, like a demon, pushing down on my chest. And like I couldn't breathe, like I was suffocating. Another story of suffocation, which makes sense now that I think about it, that I've had so many lung experiences in my life because I was in such an oppressive religion, obviously. But yes, so I had this nightmare that there was this demon that was like trying to suffocate me. And I woke up and I screamed. I just like sat up and I like a guttural scream. And my parents came running into my room and they were like, "What's going on?" And I can't remember exactly what they said, but I remember leaving that situation knowing that what had happened to me was a dark spirit was trying to attack me because I was about to be baptized. You get baptized when you're 8, when you're Mormon. And I'm sure my parents didn't phrase it like that. I'm sure they tried to phrase it in a fluffy kind of way like Mormons always do. But I remember thinking like, oh, it's a good thing I'm about to get baptized because that's what that was. There was a dark spirit that was trying to prevent me from getting baptized. And I look back on this and I'm like, if there is one thing I would never instill in my children, it's a belief in dark spirits. And it's like, you know, this is a whole other topic. I mean, when I first left Mormonism and was like questioning Christianity, I became very curious about the concept of dark spirits and of evil, because there's obviously evil in the world, right? It's everywhere. And so I was like, what? Like, if evil's not coming from Satan, where does it come from? And like, what is a dark spirit? And like, what do other spiritual traditions or philosophies say about evil and about dark spirits? And even like in different fields of psychology, like what are they saying about the nature of evil and demons? And that's a whole other topic. There are so many different philosophies or theories or ideas or ways to explain or understand dark spirits that are 10 million times more integrated and holistic and helpful than the Christian lens. The Christian lens, of course, is literalizing those experiences. There was a wedding that I worked at recently. I've worked in the wedding industry for like almost 20 years. And I had a bride who was very, very Christian. I'm not sure exactly which religion specifically, but I was under the impression that it was like a very kind of like an extreme Christian practice that she had. And there was a moment where she was with her bridal party. She was with like all of her bridesmaids. And one of her bridesmaids brought up something about like dark spirits. I can't remember what it was. It was something very benign. Like she started talking about, it was like a horror film or like, I don't know. It was just, she just started talking about something. And I remember thinking it was like not a big deal. And the bride was like, "Stop talking about this." And the bridesmaid kind of like laughed a little and she like kept talking and whatever. And the bride was like, "I'm being serious." She's like, "You need to stop talking about this right now." And she like got angry because that's how afraid she was of inviting dark spirits in. And anyone who grew up Christian knows how that narrative is like, you have to like bless your home to keep the dark spirits out. Like they're just trying to get in. And if you like watch a horror film, if you do anything that's even remotely like mimics something that comes from Satan, you are inviting those spirits into your house and into your body. And you could feel it. I could feel it in this client. She was legitimately petrified, like to the point of like rage, where she's like, "Do not talk about that." And that just shows you, one, how terrified Christians are in reality. Like that whole belief system is just rooted in fear. And two, how split off they are from their own shadow. You know, like if you're that scared of quote unquote evil, that like you're afraid that it's just going to like, it's going to attack you, that it's going to come in and possess you if you accidentally do the wrong thing or talk about the wrong thing or whatever. If you're that scared of being possessed by it, that just shows you you're at the mercy of your own shadow. And that's what happens. That's what happens in Jungian psychology. They talk about this, how the more split off you are from something, the more deeply it is buried in your unconscious, the more external it will feel to you. And it will start to feel like a possession. It will start to feel like something is coming in from the outside and attacking you. When in reality, it's just your own, most of the time, deeply internalized shame and fear that you're severely disconnected from and terrified of. And I'm not one to be like, I mean, I have friends personally who have had experiences with spirits or energies that feel like definitely less than friendly, you know? So I'm not one to be like, I mean, I'm not an atheist. But I'm also not one to be like, oh, that's a dark spirit and that's a demon. Like I have so many different perspectives on what could potentially be happening. And I don't think there's like a one size fits all sort of a narrative. But regardless of whatever you think about it here, you know, like while we're embodied, you know, if there's a spirit that somehow got stuck moving on and is like haunting you now or whatever it is, whatever you believe here and now, that's completely separate from believing that like even after you die, you could be tormented by dark spirits. You could be in an eternal hell. Guys, that's crazy. Like that. And then the only reason that you feel safe in Christianity is because you have Jesus. So it's like an incredibly literalized and polarized spiritual theology. And that level of polarization leads to intense amounts of fear, which then creates the need for a savior archetype. It's like everything is externalized. God, Jesus, they save you. Satan damns you. You have no power in yourself except for to choose Jesus. My therapist was asking me this the other day because we were talking about empowerment. She was like, do you ever feel like, can you remember times in your life where you felt empowered? And I was like, I was always taught if I left the church, if I didn't have a relationship with Jesus, I would have no power. So in Christianity, nothing is coming from like within you, which leads me to the next thing that I was going to talk about. It's very terrifying to have that little power, right? To be just like at the whim of, you know, it's like, hopefully I don't accidentally like be too influenced by Satan and he takes my soul to hell. That's obviously like a very scary way to live. But it's also very convenient because when you externalize the badness, you never have to look at the evil inside of yourself. And this is the thing that like, because Christians believe so much that like the bad guy is out there and our job is to hold to Jesus and protect against the bad guy that's out there. That's essentially, and then as long as you have Jesus, you feel safe. So then it's like in the scary world with everything that's happening, which is fucking terrifying, where there is real evil, people doing horrific things, Jesus becomes your only pathway to safety. Your only way to feel safe. And he gives you this sense of like a way to separate yourself from what is happening in the world, which is incredibly convenient. And that's why it will slowly disconnect you from your humanity, because you are not part of the evil. You are not the bad, they are the bad. The shadow is not inside of me, the shadow is out there. The shadow is Satan, the shadow is in those people. I don't have to integrate my own shadow, I don't have to look within, I don't have to recognize the evil within me because it's not there. I choose Jesus. And that's really convenient. it is really convenient and it feels really good to be able to say, I am the good guy. I am the good guy in this battle of good and evil. I am on the right side. And this is why, I never argue with Christians on the internet, because they're essentially they're repelled by, or repulsed, I guess I should say, by anything that has the appearance of evil. And so if you come at them with any sort of aggression or confrontation or anger, all it's going to do is make them dig their heels deeper into their own conviction, because you're proving to them that there is a battle of good and evil and that they really are on the right side. Jesus is literally the personification of safety. And to have that in the state of the world that we live in, it's people will hold to that to the death. It's they will completely bypass the fact that, Jesus was not white, that Jesus was an immigrant, that Jesus was, essentially an activist. They will bypass his compassion and his charity and whatever else he represented that was true and good and wholesome, and cling to the fact that he makes them feel safe. Because if they choose Jesus, they are on the right side. And then, on top of all of that, you throw in the Bible. Don't even get me started on the Bible. Sometimes people will comment on my Instagram, on my videos, and they'll be like, you don't even know the Bible. You never even understood the Bible. And I'm like, if you knew how little I care to understand the Bible, they say it it's an insult, and I'm like, I can't think of a book that I'd rather understand less. Even though I have technically read the Bible from cover to cover, it's a book that can potentially be filled with a lot of really rich mythology. But then you have all of this, religious dogma. Pick your choice, whatever Christian religion you're a part of, pick your, whatever it is. You got your own flavor of dogma. You add in your own interpretation, literal interpretation of this book of scripture, depending on what religion you're a part of. And then you throw in groupthink, indoctrination, people who want your money, Mormonism especially, or people who have their own agendas. You throw in the patriarchy, you throw in propaganda, and then shit gets fucking weird. And here we have the situation that we're in. Here we have the Christian psyche. I don't know, like I said, I don't argue with Christians on the internet. I don't know what to do with whatever's happening with Christian nationalism and everything that's happening in the country. I don't know. I don't have the answers, obviously. All I know is what I can take with me that I learned from Mormonism. Patterns that I will not repeat because I learned the hard way. One of them being, I will never externalize my sense of safety, and I will also never externalize my own shadow. Meaning, I personally refuse to become the same thing that Christians are, but just on the opposite side. It's just because you leave Christianity does not mean that you're not still living in the Christian paradigm with the Christian psyche. There's something that happens when it's like the feeling of having a righteous cause. It's like a feeling of righteousness. And it's so it gives me the biggest ick, because obviously that's how it is when you're Christian, when you're Mormon. But then as I've left, I can see that pattern very clearly, and it's everywhere. It doesn't exist just in Christianity. People do the same thing on both sides. They externalize their own shadow. They then leave, and then they're like, and not everyone, this is just a pattern that I've seen. And they're like, now I know the truth. I am right now, and they are wrong. I am the good guy now, and the Christians are wrong. And that's not to say that there isn't such a thing as objective truth to some degree, right? I don't want to make it seem it's just I feel like we need some sort of sense of like what is right and what is wrong, obviously. But there's an added level on top of it. Like I said, this like groupthink, this like I'm a part of the righteous cause, I'm on the right side now. That to me is still living in the same paradigm. And so it has become more important for me personally to integrate my own shadow, to do my own inner work so that I can see myself clearly instead of focusing so much on how much everyone else is doing it wrong, because that's exactly what I did when I was Mormon. And instead, focus on my own individuation process so I can know myself, meaning know my shadow, know my own evil, know what I have not yet integrated, so that I don't have to project it out there. I don't have to look for it out there because I will know it in myself. And then from there, I can determine how can I help? What can I do? So that I'm not just perpetually engaging in this battle of good and evil that Christianity gave me that I don't want to be a part of. Like, I still love Jesus. I have a picture of him on my altar, and I can't remember what it's called, this painting, this depiction, but it's one of the oldest depictions of him known. I think it's in like a catacomb in Europe somewhere. And I really like it because he looks just like, he's like carrying a bucket, and he kind of looks like he's fed up with this shit. And he looks like he's more like, why is there so much suffering? And what can I do about it? And that to me is the real essence of Jesus. How can I help? What can I do to help alleviate suffering? So, like I was saying, all I can do, like I don't have the answers, but all I know is for myself personally, the lessons that I've learned from Mormonism, and that is one of them. I can't externalize my shadow. I can't externalize my light. I also can't ever buy into this idea that I have a truth and other people need my truth, or that I am somehow good and other people are somehow bad. And I'm not doing this. This is a work in progress for me. This is like where I am hopefully headed, to a place that is much more integrated and holistic, that moves beyond duality, that moves beyond the polarization and the divisiveness. But of course, I'm like, talking on the internet all the time about the harmfulness of Christianity because it's important to understand these patterns. It's important to understand these patterns in ourselves and what we're playing out and what's happening so that they don't just keep repeating. And what I love about Jungian psychology too is it's like, as long as the psyche is unintegrated, like you haven't integrated your own shadow, and collectively we have not done that, it will be like a game of whack-a-mole, where it's like you'll see the bad guy and you'll be like, there's the bad guy, and then you smash the bad guy and then you're like, yeah, we got him. And then just give it a little bit of time and the bad guy will pop up in a different form. And then, this is the bad guy now, get him. And then it's like, give it some time. Oh no, there it is again in a different form. Because what's trying to happen is the collective unconscious, the shadow needs to integrate collectively. We can't keep externalizing it. Sometimes when I talk about this, it feels like I'm like trying to become enlightened or something, which it feels really not feasible for me. But I do know people who live this way. And they're not doing the spiritual bypassy thing where they're like, oh, because I believe in non-duality, all of this is an illusion and none of it matters. And you know what I mean? They're not doing that. But they are also not living in a polarized psyche themselves. And so their approach to activism is much more clear. And it's like, if I'm going to try to actually be like Jesus, if I'm going to actually try to see the suffering in the world and be like, what can I do? I don't want to be repeating it from the same place of I'm a good guy who needs to help people who need my help. And I need to stop the bad guy because I'm the good. I can't do that. I have to do it from a place where I have moved beyond that paradigm. And so that's the work that I'm in now, where I'm like trying to take full responsibility for myself, full responsibility for my shadow. And anyone who has done extensive amounts of shadow work knows that the more you get into your shadow, the more you're like, man, like I am Jesus and I am Satan. Everything that, like, Jesus was essentially just an example of what we have the potential to become. And Jesus does not exist without Satan. You can't have the light without the dark. And Satan also exists in me. It's all in me. And it all wants to be integrated and seen so that I can recognize and embody my own wholeness. In my last episode, I mentioned this woman, Shane, who is a Lakota woman. She's half Lakota, half German, who I have learned from and mentored under. And she's wonderful. And she has been seeing spirits and talking to spirits since she was like a kid, like before she knew that other people could not see them. It took her, like, she had to get a little bit older until she realized, like, oh, these people aren't actually here. Like, no one else can see these people that I'm talking to. And she tells this story about how there was this one man that she would see repeatedly. And she didn't know who he was, but, like, he was nice and, like, friendly. And so she would, like, hang out with him. And, like, I mean, I don't know I've never hung out with a spirit, so I don't know what that's like. But she said that he felt really kind and, like, made her feel really safe. And he would, like, talk to her and whatever. So then one day, she's like, what's your name? And he's like, my name's Jesus. And she was like, oh, okay. And she didn't think anything of it because she spent a good portion of her life growing up on a reservation. So she didn't know anything about Christianity. And so then one day, you know, she sees him again. They're hanging out, whatever you do when you're hanging out with spirits. And he goes, listen, your parents are going to take you to church on Sunday. And while you're there, I want you to ignore everything that everyone says about me. And she's like, okay. So sure enough, her parents take her to church. And she walks in the doors, and there on the wall is a giant picture of Jesus. And she's like, oh, Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, you know, if I was Jesus, I'd be pissed. If I was Jesus right now, I'd be like, would everyone leave me the fuck alone? Like, this has gotten out of hand. This is not what I signed up for. Like, the hell is wrong with you guys? One thing I do want to say before I end, which feels important to say, is that living here in Utah, I cannot tell you the amount of times someone has told me that I really need to watch The Chosen. I can't think of anything I'd rather watch less. And it's so funny because even when I was Mormon, like, I hate the idea of fake Jesus. I'm like, if there is a show or a movie where an actor has been paid to play Jesus, I'm like, that's a hard pass for me. Like, you're going to try to get an entire, like, the archetype of the self, the archetype of God embodied, and you're going to try to put it in this human man actor? I've never once seen anything with fake Jesus where I was like, oh, that feels like I really am feeling Jesus right now. And I also I'm like, how do you prepare for that role? Like, I think about, like, you know, they're on set and they're about to start rolling and you know, they're just like really trying to like get in tune with like their inner Jesus. I'm like, I can't. I'm sure it's a lovely show. I'm sure it's really helping a lot of people and, you know, whatever. But I'm like, I cannot get past fake Jesus. That should be illegal. There should be no fake Jesus. And speaking of that, did you guys know that here in Utah, you can hire a Jesus lookalike to come to your family party? This is real, you guys. I know people who have done this. Or like come to your family photos and like be in your family pictures with you. This is so funny to me because let's say you hire Jesus to come to your party. Like, does he have to like talk like Jesus? Like, verily, behold, let us gather in the kitchen, you know? Does he have to like perform a miracle? Does he have to show the scars in his hands and feet? Like, how do you act like Jesus at a family party? Does he get to have snacks? Does he have to be Christian? The concept is so funny to me. I kind of want to hire a Jesus like for my own, just for like my own party, you know? I feel like that could be really fun. Okay, I hope this was, if not helpful, at least interesting. I mean, I obviously have a lot of thoughts on Jesus because I love Jesus. And also, what the fuck? You know? And just being on both sides of it, you know, I feel like it's a total mindfuck. It really is. Like, when they say indoctrination, or they say like cult, or they say, you know, brainwashing, like that is real. That's real. Like when you come out of that, it's like, it's mind blowing. Like there was not one point in my life ever that I even thought for even a minute that what I believed wasn't the literal truth of existence. I didn't know people who weren't Christian. Like, I think I met my first person, or, you know, like in Mormonism, you're encouraged to not be close to people who are not Mormon, at least when I was growing up. I don't know how it is now. And so it's like all my friends were Mormon. And then like the few friends or people that I knew that weren't Mormon, they were like Catholic, right? Like they were still Christian. I didn't know anybody who was like agnostic or atheist or like some other belief. I didn't meet anyone like that until I was like probably graduated from high school. And so coming out of that, like, it feels like all of a sudden you're like you've been in a weird trance. And I just really wanted to speak to it because it's painful. You know, it's like the people that I know who are Mormon. I mean, obviously Utah's mostly Mormon. Like most of them, especially the ones that I grew up with and grew up around, are really, really good people. Like they're not like, they're just like salt of the earth people, right? Like they're trying to do good in the world. And they have this incredible connection to Jesus. Like that's where things get so sticky, is it's like these good people who are connecting to the goodness found in Jesus in a real way. And then that's getting mixed in with a whole bunch of other weird stuff that is harmful. And it's confusing. It was really, really confusing for me. Like coming out of that was like a shock, like shocking to my system. And learning how to like take responsibility for myself and become empowered. You know, Christianity is also it's a very disempowering religion because, like I said, everything is externalized. And so coming out of that and like individuating and like recognizing my own wholeness and trying to come into a sense of empowerment by myself, like on my own, without needing a savior, has been a really long process. And I don't know personally that like anybody yelling at me or telling me that I was wrong would have ever gotten through to me. It's like something that has to happen. It has to come through you. And however that's going to be for people in the world, it's going to be different for everyone, however that happens, or if it does. But in the meantime, I will continue to share all of my thoughts on this on the internet because I think it's really important to talk about. All right, that's all I got. Thank you guys so much. If you want to see more of my stuff or hear more of my thoughts, you can find me on Instagram or TikTok under Stephanie Ann Again. And let me know if there's something that you guys would like me to cover in a future episode. Okay, thank you.